only a procedural resolution which launch negotiations between states. After that, we had 6 months of negotiation in Nairobi, negotiation between states in 2019. And it was more or less a failure. We can say a deception, because a minority of states, but of strong states, the US, Brazil, other states, more or less Russia, were opposed to the idea of the Global Pact. And if you see the adoption of the first resolution of the UNJ, you had, I think, 143 states in favor, and only 5 states against. Only 5 states against the launch of negotiation in 2018. The US, I'm not going to mention all the states, but that means that these 5 states, at the end of the day, win. They win. Why? Because of the rule of consensus. This is an interpretation of the rule of consensus in which consensus, more or less, is unanimity. And with this kind of rule, we cannot go further in the field of environmental law. So at the end of the day, in Nairobi, states decided to postpone the decision. They decided to prepare only a political declaration, not a real treaty, a political declaration. And the content of this declaration is not very clear, to be honest. And the agenda, the next step are the following. First, in 2021, in the next UN Environmental Assembly, the 5th session in Nairobi in February 2021, we will have the framework of this political declaration. It's only about preparing this political declaration, but the final step will be in 2022, and I think it's our target, 2022, the adoption of the political declaration. So that means that at the same time, it's difficult to have an idea, but first, the idea of the Global Pact is not dead. And I think that it is a good idea. And one day or another, we will have a Global Pact. Maybe in 5 years, maybe 10 years, I don't know, but we will have a Global Pact. So probably not in 2022. But so the idea remains on the table. But for the moment, the issue is the preparation of a political declaration. And it could be interesting. And I think the NGOs, the role of NGOs is to put pressure on state to have the most ambitious political declaration. That's where we are now. 8 minutes.
Thank you. No, I think it was clear. I think it's also quite hopeful and realistic that I think our task as NGOs is still to have a strong pact for the environment. If it's not in 2022, then it will be later. But I think that's still the ambition, of course. I would like to go to the next speaker, Janice. I will go to your PowerPoint and share it. Wait. Okay, are you seeing it? Yes, sir?
Yes, I'm seeing it. Okay.
Yeah.
So my role is to talk about the politics surrounding the Global Pact for the Environment. Next slide. Next slide, please. So I'm going to skate over some of these things. Oh, back one, please. So I'm going to skate over some of the things that, that Jan's already covered. So just to say that we did have in 2019 3 open-ended working groups, and they looked at the UN Secretary General's report on gaps on international environmental law, and then considered the scope and parameters and feasibility of an international instrument. And then their role was to make recommendations back to the UN General Assembly. Next slide. And so what we found in these open-ended working groups was that there was a lot of political resistance, some of it around the way in which the Global Pact was introduced. It was an initiative that started outside the UN system, and then it came with the French initiative that Jan mentioned, and then it came through the UN General Assembly rather than UNEP. And throughout this, it didn't really develop member states' ownership properly. Next slide. And the process in these working groups was the working groups were presented with this enormous gap report on gaps on international environmental law, and proceeded to work through it. And this somehow took them down the rabbit hole, as we say, sort of miring them in a lot of details. So the process caused problems as well. Next slide. Because people were thrown into this complex report, many of the member states were very worried about potential measures and implications. Some of them, many of them, just had a watching brief, no instructions from their capitals. And also, interestingly, many of the NGOs were in this boat too. Next slide. So the supporters of the Global Pact, they pointed out that international environmental law is fragmented, weak because it's non-binding, has got blind spots, and instruments are often sector-specific and limited. There are different applications of international environmental law principles, and a global framework instrument would give long-term perspectives and include main principles to create a level playing field, and also would bring things consistent with other areas of international law, such as human rights, trade, humanitarian, etc. Next slide. There were some strong allies for the pact. Micronesia, strong supporter, small island states, because their future's at risk, countries like St. Lucia, Guyana, Costa Rica, and some others. Next slide. There are a lot of negative voices, though, raising questions like, what is a gap? Are there any gaps? Despite this enormous report that set them all out, and saying that sometimes gaps existed because of delicately balanced negotiating positions, i.e. some gaps reflected a conscious decision to leave areas alone. And many expressed concern about possibly weakening or opening up of existing MEAs. And many stress that the main problem is lack of implementation of existing agreements. And then there were the moves to downgrade this to a declaration. Next slide. And so there were many negative reactions. Actually, there were far more negative reactions than the people who voted against the initiative at the General Assembly. But the very hard-line blockers, as Jan mentioned, were the USA and Brazil, who were both extremely anti, Russia and Argentina, and sometimes China added to that negative voice, extremely strongly against. Next slide. There are a lot of countries sitting on the fence, including some that we normally think of as allies. For example, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, Bolivia, and Ecuador. And some felt that more arguments were needed about why a global pact could be beneficial, and others were either had their own systems and didn't want another layer of bureaucracy over and above that, and others were worried about the ability to implement this. Next slide. Next slide.
This is European Union. Do you have it?
No, I have now. I've got European Union now.
Yeah, okay.
So even within the European Union, there wasn't a great convergence in favour of the pact. And there seemed to be some interplay between France, obviously is a great supporter, and Germany, who was more dubious. And the problem here is that the EU speaks with one voice on a common position. So there was one voice that was kind of diluted, and all the individual voices of EU member states that would have been in favour were completely missing from negotiations, unlike other regional blocs who speak individually as well as one voice. Next slide. The African group was broadly negative, and their main concern, which was shared with a number of other developing countries, was concerned about the potential obligations and the burden of compliance given their development priorities. Next slide. There was a lot of politicking, a lot of backwards and forwards, not only in meetings, but also, as you can see, in the margins. Next slide. And the process, almost collapsed. And the NGOs, they went in with a strong voice. But it did worry me, did we inadvertently even scare member states further? The process did just dissolve, and people were so worried about the implications. And I think we have to be careful to avoid this happening again, but to give avenues where things can positively move forward. Next slide. And so, as Jan said, the need for consensus, a major problem, and also this strong body of antis who are going to be speaking firmly against. So, what next? We need to think about all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice, for your realistic approach and analysis of the process. It was indeed with ups and downs, but that is always when you do pioneering work, because I think it is pioneering work. And then, you always have a strong lobby against you. And then I think after a while, I agree with Jan on that. So maybe there must be a time where they see, well, this is really important, so go for it. Okay, Anna, are you there? Because it's up to you to inform us about the gaps. Hey.
Okay, hello to everyone. So I have prepared a presentation, and can you follow me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have prepared a presentation, so I'm going to share my screen, but you have to allow me to share the screen. You are the host.
Yeah, I think now it's okay.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
No.
Okay, I don't know what's going on. Okay, what about, okay, I will again do it again.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, we see a lot.
Okay. So it's going a bit slow.
It's okay.
Can you see it now? Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Excellent,
Great.
finally. Okay, so I'm going to focus on, as I was asked, on international environmental rule of law, and I have entitled this "To Face the Planetary Emergency," because the Global Pact, as Jan Aguilar mentioned, it was about strengthening the law we have to fight the planetary emergency. And he was explaining about the need for a legally binding instrument. And when I talk about international environmental rule of law, I mean the institutional setting as well as the legal framework we have. So what we have now, and I want to start from what the new General Assembly resolution speaks about. I was looking at it, and one of its first paragraphs just said, recalling this is the typical way of resolutions of the General Assembly, and recalls all the legal framework we have. In fact, it also includes all the major outcomes of United Nations conferences. So from the Stockholm conference in 1972, it has been developed a strong legal framework for the protection of the environment. We have around 500 multilateral environmental agreements that have been translated or transposed into legal frameworks at the national, regional level. So we have all this legal framework for some time ago. And it was interesting. I said, okay, I'm going to recall this morning when I was preparing this presentation, I'm going to recall, for example, Agenda 21. So let's recall Agenda 21. And Agenda 21 has many chapters, 40 chapters. Agenda 21 was one of the documents adopted during the Rio conference in 1992. So it has a chapter that it's entitled Integrating Environment and Development in Decision Making. And it has one of the objectives was to provide an effective legal and regulatory framework. And this chapter says, laws and regulations suited to country-specific conditions are among the most important instruments for transforming environment and development policies into action. But action only comes with these legal instruments are properly implemented and enforced and executed. So this was already said in 1992. Also, I was reviewing chapter 39 that speaks about international legal instruments, multilateral environmental agreements. And when I was going through it, I was just reading what it has been said during the whole Global Pact for the Environment process. So for me, sorry, I'm getting older, but this is all déjà vu, because we are always discussing about the same thing. And we are recalling and recalling, but we are not implementing really very well. So as Janice mentioned now, we have also in the previous resolution that started or impelled the Global Pact for the Environment process, there was a mandate in that General Assembly resolution for the Secretary General to prepare a report on gaps on international environmental law, because what the Global Pact for the Environment was precisely trying to solve was the problems with international environmental law, with environmental law in general, because as said in chapter 8 of Agenda 21, we need the law to put policies into action. And laws are the response of society to scientific evidences. And if we have just paper and the laws are not implemented, then we have nothing. It's just negotiations and negotiations and talks and talks. So I must disagree now with Jan, sorry, but for me, the Secretary General report is an excellent work because we have so many institutions, so many pieces of legislation, and just to bring all this analysis in 45 pages is a great effort. Of course, I can understand that you said it is complex, but for lawyers, this report is an excellent work. So I would say that it was the problem for me, and it's a personal opinion, of course, it was not the report itself. It was all the questions that were posed around the report. Another of the problems is that if we were discussing about legal issues, there were many delegates in the delegations that they have no idea on these aspects. So if you are having a negotiation in which there are involved people that they don't understand any word about this, what you can get is a failure, okay? So the Secretary General report just made a conclusion. It's a very well report on, and as I said, and reveals that there are gaps and deficiency at multiple levels. There are problems with implementation. There is a problem with fragmentation of institutions, and also the relationship with multilateral environmental agreements and other international environment-related instruments at the trade, because trade negotiations, this has been for ages. It was discussed already in Rio about the need to have a trade system that is supportive to the environment, but we don't have it, even though in 1994, the World Trade Organization was created as a succession of the GATT, and we are just progressing very little. So, in fact, this General Assembly resolution, the new one, the 73-333, said that they are stressing, that the General Assembly stressed the need to continue to address in a comprehensive and coherent manner the challenges posed by environmental degradation in the context of sustainable development. So one of the main problems that we have, in addition to the really a lot of problems with implementation, and I cannot talk about this in 7 minutes because there are so many problems about institutions, about the lack of resources, and that this has been said for ages and ages. I really believe that it is an urgent need for a systemic approach because we have a very fragmented system. And we have, and this has been shared this morning in emails, about we have now scientific evidences about how our Earth functions and how it's the Earth system. So we have a legal framework that is very apart from how is the functioning of our Earth. So we have these existing legal frameworks that doesn't consider at all the interactions between the components of our Earth system, which is it's the biosphere and the geosphere. And as you can see, for example, a very clear example is the Biodiversity Convention and the Climate Change Convention. The Biodiversity Convention protects the living part, but we have the Climate Change Convention, the Paris Agreement, that protects the geosphere. And there has been hardly cooperation among those conventions for years, since its existence. So we need to ensure coordination among treaties regime. I have many other ideas, and I don't know if we need to build from the Global Pact, but we need to introduce new elements. And one of the elements that I think that it's key, it's the recognition of the Earth system as a common home for, as a common heritage of mankind, and the adoption of the principle and unity and integrity of the Earth system, as has been proposed by Common Home of Humanity, where this organization that we were together in the 3 working groups meetings, and we presented supportive documents. So there are many problems that we are facing, but we need a new approach, and we need a systemic approach. And I think that it is key for this new approach, this recognition. If we have the international environmental laws well implemented, and we have a systemic approach, I am sure that we can achieve sustainable development goals. It will be protected, the human rights, including the human rights to a healthy environment. So the solution is to work for a strong declaration as for Stockholm Plus 50, a strong declaration that establishes the basis for a future legally binding document, treaty, or whatever that improves all these lacks and all these gaps. But I don't know if we will be on time. That's the problem. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna.
You're welcome.
Okay, so can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes,
so we
yes,
can
but
see again
yes,
people?
of course. I'm just
It's okay.
yeah, it's it takes me time.
Oh no, it's okay. In the meantime, we had now 3 speakers telling us a little bit about the history and the reaction of the member states, and also even more innovative proposals. I think it's good now that we go to the directions on the NGOs so far. I mean, of course, we worked all on the papers and in the expert meetings on the questions that were on the table. So that was kind of directed by the process. Nevertheless, we always had some more proactive ideas as well. But now I would like to give floor to Johannes when he can inform us to what, I'm multitasking, also looking for the PowerPoint he sent me, on that he can inform us about the ideas that and the reactions that the NGOs had during those working groups. I'm now totally lost. Okay. I tried to, is Johannes there?
Yeah.
Okay. I tried to put your PowerPoint online, but when I put your PowerPoint on, he starts to do strange.
Okay.
I don't know if you have it there.
Yes, let me try to share the screen. Let's try this.
Does it work for you? If
Nope.
not, I can try again.
No, it doesn't work for me. Sorry, but I mean, I can start if.
Yeah, you can just start. And okay, yeah, please do that.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Johannes from Ocean Care, and I just wanted to briefly introduce some of the core elements of the NGO position. And I'm aware that not every NGO puts the same emphasis on the core objectives that I'm about to discuss. And as the process progresses, I'm sure that positions will change, and that positions have already changed. So I'm fully aware of that. But can you see the presentation, or it's still not working?
No, I'm trying because I have to go to read my mail again. Just, yeah, we'll see what's there.
Okay, the main objective for us has been to first highlight that there are gaps in international environmental law and implementation. And this might seem like a foregone conclusion, but as Jan, Anna, and Yannis have mentioned earlier, there are still some countries that don't recognize that there are gaps in international environmental law. And there's even some dispute on the definition of gaps, as we've seen in the first session, the first 2 days in Nairobi. And the second focus of our effort has been to highlight the necessity to fill the gaps in international environmental law to strengthen the means of implementation. But again, without taking this as an opportunity to renegotiate or undermine the work of existing MEAs or other achievements that have been made thus far. And what we have done is to highlight that the Global Pact for the Environment, although there are other options as well, that the Global Pact is a good option, and it is not really a reinvention of the wheel, as Jan has mentioned earlier, and that it is main focus is on the compilation of existing legal principles, and that it is a necessary instrument for filling, in one sense, filling gaps, but also in interpreting existing gaps and ambiguity. So it should, the objective, and we've highlighted this on numerous occasions, is to give clarity and predictability to international environmental law. And we see the Global Pact as a package of measures which must include agreement on the principles of international environmental law. It should also include provisions on enhancing global governance by, in effect, enhancing coordination between MEAs and UNEP and the bodies between MEAs, so scientific bodies and the secretariats, and also to encourage and facilitate capacity building to support the implementation of environmental law. And it must, and this has been highlighted, I think, in the email exchange as well over the past few days, and in the document that's currently being circulated for submission, it must include financial and technical support for countries that do not have the necessary means to implement a potential global pact for the environment. And finally, we also think that the package must include measures that raises awareness for environmental issues and law on a national level, so domestic level. If you go one slide further. Yeah, so Jan has already addressed the issue of consensus versus majority. And back in Nairobi, when we discussed this issue, we agreed that, sure, far-reaching consensus would be preferable to get as many states as possible to sign, to ratify, and to implement. But we have to also ask ourselves, and we did so in Nairobi, whether this is realistic. And this is against the backdrop that we've seen and read and heard the statements made by very powerful member states who question the need of this whole process at all. So while we have tried to aim for consensus, it was agreed that it would be better to reach an agreement with a majority. And here I have a statement from Laurent Fabius, who's the former president of COP21 and the former French prime minister, and who really summed it up quite well, that he said, well, consensus is necessary because most pollutants or most environmental challenges are transboundary, and we need to get as many countries involved as possible. But it should not be at the cost of abandoning the project. And I think this is very indicative of someone who has so much diplomatic experience to highlight this issue. One slide down, please. Yeah, a second or a further main focus of our position has been to highlight the Stockholm plus 50 anniversary that is coming up. And I'm sure everyone knows, but the UN Conference on Human Environment was held in 1972, and it led to the creation of the UN Environmental Program. And it really marked the launch of international cooperation on the environment. And just briefly to why this is relevant is because we felt that this is a good hook to define a deadline by 2020, and it would be an excellent opportunity to mark the anniversary of the Stockholm process and to celebrate this anniversary by setting a new milestone by adopting a legally binding agreement or instrument. Can you go down one more? Thanks. While those are the core elements I know there's other elements that were discussed, and I'll get to that in my last slide, but we also highlighted a number of quick fixes that could be taken in the interim by UNEP, and these include clustering of existing MPAs that are under UNEP's purview and to determine how work could be coordinated, to also examine other MEAs, how they work, how, especially in terms of implementation, how it could be enhanced, and to also get UNEP to encourage the review of existing mechanism and general implementation instruments in MEAs. And this, as Anna has highlighted, is one of the most important gaps, is that really is implementation, and UNEP can address this already in the interim. And we also focused our work on getting UNEP to promote the ratification and implementation of MEAs, to establish synergies between already existing agreements, also in a view of not duplicating any work, and to also provide MEAs with sufficient means to conduct their work and to facilitate the review of best practice with focus on implementation. Next slide, please. We also believe that UNEP could undertake an analysis and to assess existing and potential financial measures that place environment at the forefront. So to assess what could be more effective, and these measures can range far and wide, but some examples could include incentives for transition to sustainable alternatives, the removal of subsidies for unsustainable production, or just other measures for the prevention and change. And this is where UNEP can really take a role in analyzing these instruments. And further, we think UNEP could address these issues in respect to capacity building and raising awareness. So they could assess whether capacity building, technical assistance, and financial support could be more effective, and also to progress efforts in providing educational resources and to encourage consumer change. Next slide, please. The points I just mentioned, they're some of the core points, and I know that civil society or members of civil society might not place emphasis on these as much as other organizations. And when reviewing notes, I know that we had some consensus and some discussion on the importance of inclusion, including environmental rights, and as Jan has mentioned, duties as well, which is becoming increasingly important. And also the idea of establishing an International Environmental Court of Justice, and the concept of Earth system as a common heritage of mankind. I know this was a topic of discussion in the email over the past few days. And another point that I didn't have time to talk about today, but right now, but which we should address later on in the later session, is the stakeholder participation. But as Yannis has already highlighted, we might have to assess whether our core objectives still reflect current realities. And as I noted at the beginning, that as we progress, obviously our positions change, and these were really just the positions we took in the first 3 sessions, which, as Yannis has highlighted, was about to collapse. So our main objective was to get the process going and to keep it going. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think I'll close there because I think everything else has been said, and we can discuss it in the second half.
Thank you, Johannes, for making this presentation. I have to thank all the speakers because as everything was very last minute, I think we all really did the efforts to have the things on time there, even making the PowerPoint. So thank you very much for that. We still have 10 minutes, so maybe there are some urgent questions. I would not go into a huge discussion now because that's indeed the agenda for the next sessions. But if there are people that have questions, I mean, practical questions on what was just told now, then please go ahead.
Hi. So,
yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm Leon Duslek. I'm from Brazil. Now I'm living in Germany, and I'm a lawyer. So, I fully agree with everything that the colleagues say, but I also feel as we are missing something that is very important for this job we need to be done, that it's talking strong there in the document about international solidarity, but not in the meaning of charity or be helpful something, but in the legal binding sense of this. Solidarity, that means solidus in Latin. That means really strong commitment to achieve the goals we need for the future we really want. So I think the thing that it's really missing there is we full connected all the things together up to reach the implementations, to reach this procedural things that were missing about these gaps. And I think the most thing about this gap is that we are missing international solidarity commitment. But I don't talk this about just the ethical or moral sense. I mean in the really legal sense of international solidarity.
Okay.
I did some inputs there.
I think you made your points. We have a few minutes left, so I think you made your points, and we can have a reaction of the lawyers in between us, Anna or Jan, how to deal with this. Is there any other question? There is one question which I think is quite broad. The impact of the pandemic in these discussions on GPA, maybe
yeah,
you can also react on that. Please, Anna, go ahead.
Yes, I think I can answer both, and if the other panelists want to answer as well. First, on international solidarity, this is already, as I mentioned in Agenda 21, if you go to chapter 39, you have means of implementation. This is the never-ending story. It's like developing countries requesting means of implementation, and it's always the same. And I don't think that it's only a problem with developing countries. There are many developed countries that they even don't put any financial budget for implementation. So, but I don't have more time, but I think that there are many instruments already behind international environmental law that it's about international solidarity. And one of the main principles on international solidarity is the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and all that it entails, okay? On the impact of the pandemic in these discussions, I didn't want to talk explicitly on this, but it's explicit because when I said we need a systemic approach, and I was talking about the lack of coordination among the multilateral environmental agreements, and this also happens at the national and regional levels, between those legal instruments that deals with the protection of the living part of the Earth system, and the one with the geosphere system or the geochemical system. This is why we have this pandemic, because for example, last year in the biodiversity report done by the international assessment, the international panel that did this assessment, they were already calling to us that the fragmentation of habitats and the impact of climate change could just bring zoonosis. And this is what has happened. And COVID-19 is a result of zoonosis. So everything, I mean, that's why we need this systemic approach. The impact of the pandemic in the discussions of the Global Pact for the Environment, I don't know what is going to happen in the next months, but what is happening around the world, it's now all about the recovery packages. But I don't think that for the international declaration, we should just start with these things. Maybe we can just make a mention of the needs that to include conditionalities, environmental conditionalities to the recovery packages. But I don't think that we should stress on the recovery packages, but more on the systemic approach that is lacking at the moment in the international environmental law system.
Okay. Jan, you want to add on this?
Yes, very quick. just regarding international solidarity, I take this opportunity to point out that the draft that we wrote in 2017 is only a first draft, and it is very open, and the content could be modified, amended, completed, and for example, complemented. And for example, we can add something more precise about international solidarity in the Global Pact for the Environment. We have an article about cooperation. It's close to solidarity, but we can complement it and put this idea. Second point, regarding pandemic, I totally agree with Anna regarding the systemic approach. And maybe it is going to change something regarding the context. You know, history show, unfortunately, that the important text has been adopted when we had catastrophe. For example, we had the blood of the revolution in France to have the Déclaration des droits de l'homme from en 1789. And we have the Second War to adopt after that, after the Second War, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's sad, but we need this kind of event to help people to be aware that we need to change. So maybe it could be an impact of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much. We are now at 2 o'clock, so I think we have to go to the next session, which is the consultation. New people are arriving. I will give them a few minutes. I also received some emails from people that lost their link. That is a problem because those links are personalized, so I cannot just send the link to them. So I don't know how to solve that problem. I will try, so I will just I'm kind of away for a few minutes, try to solve the problem, to have them in, to see what I can do. And in the meantime, we wait for the other people. So you can also go and have a whatever you want. So I think in 2 minutes, we will be back.